What's up, guys? I've been here playing some of this CFB 26, trying to get my defense in order, trying to think about more at a high fundamental level what it means to play good defense. I guess in general, in terms of football, but also obviously in terms of these football video games, Madden, college football, what you need to do to simply stop your opponent from gaining yards, stop your opponent from controlling the game, stop your opponent from ultimately scoring and winning on you. I think, a lot of what we try to do on defense in this game kind of stems from what might be overpowered at any given time. Certain zones or coverages, or maybe man is certain better in some years than others, or there's some good blitz or some formation that allows a good blitz and things like that. But I feel like the last few years of the game have been kind of stabilizing, and that's kind of good and bad in the sense that it's there's some not as much novelty from year to year, but also good in a sense that okay, you can kind of now settle down, sink into a way of play that you like, and that can kind of translate from year to year. Sure, there's new mechanics and things like that, but generally speaking, the game doesn't fundamentally change year over year. So you can start to think about, okay, for both sides of the ball, but maybe, want to start chatting about defense a lot more. What it really means to play good defense at a high level again. When I say high level, I don't mean like good, great level, but like conceptually, like bird's eye view. And then from there, once you kind of have those pieces to start filling in the details, and we'll certainly get into the details with due time. But this video, I want to talk about the space-time continuum of football. And this applies to the defensive side of the ball and the offensive side of the ball. It applies really to everything. But I want to take it in this video from a defensive perspective. I think, when you get caught up in the weeds of things and how certain coverages work, how certain blitzes work, how run fits work, and things like that, you kind of lose the bigger picture. And what it really is simply, it's constraining the space for the offense with limited resources and realizing that it's not just space that you are defending, it's also a time component. Okay, so it's not, these football plays, okay, you call a play and defense calls a play, but they're dynamic. They change throughout the course of the play. Okay, especially when you have things like pre-play, you have motions and adjustments, and then you have maybe a play fake, so there's a certain run fit aspect of it, and then you get into the play and there's shallow routes turn into deeper routes and things like that. So there's a lot you have to consider. Okay, so when you are playing defense, again, it's this space component. How can I restrict the space for my opponent without knowing what they're going to run at me, and without necessarily having an advantage in terms of my players where I can just lock up in man coverage and just win every single down. Especially when you're playing an ultimate team in this game, the teams are more or less the same, right? In terms of your skill gap, you're basically have the best players across the board, so there isn't too much consideration. But where was I trying to get at here? It's yeah, we have limited resources in that we have 11 players, and we need to constrict the time and the space for any given down. That being said, given the specific scenario, okay, maybe it's late in game, maybe it's late down, maybe it's fourth and long, maybe it's, second and short. Those types of things can help you adjust and help you, put resources in more likely areas. And we'll get to that. We'll certainly get to that when you have maybe skill mismatches, or you have different scenarios that call for different things. But I'm trying to think about even just the situation where, let's assume all the players are equal, and let's assume it's just 1st and 10, anything can happen. Okay, so the majority of situations that you're going to be coming up again. And then, of course, you want to be ready for those edge cases and those half edge cases, so you can, optimize where your resources are at. Before we get into we'll kind of think about it both ways, space and time at the same time. So as I mentioned before, ideally you could just call basically cover 0 every single down, and you're going to be gapped out. You're going to be screaming at the quarterback. There's not going to be enough people to protect, right? There's always going to be a +1 that's ready for the quarterback. And then you have man across the board. Okay, so you're not going to have any sort of busts. But again, it requires to have superiority in terms of your defense. One fundamental thing that you should always consider when you're thinking about football, when you're thinking about whether it's offensive side or the defensive side, is that let's look at these two guys right here, the slot corner and the slot receiver. I don't know who these guys are. I don't watch too much college. I don't know what their matchups are, but let's just assume that they're, 1-to-1. They're equal players. I know the offense has a star under him, but again, for the purpose of this, I don't really care at this point, okay, what's working, what's not working. Just conceptual. We're just talking about conceptual. The offense will always have first mover's advantage. Okay? So if you have one-on-one, mono, one-on-one, and it's, there's space to the left, there's space to the right. You're in the slot right here. The offense will always have first mover's advantage. So if the corner is head up on him, he's always going to lose, basically. Now, I don't know if I do this, if that'll actually be the case. So let's say I run a little slant right here. He should always lose. Okay, he lost inside. And let's see on the other side. He should also lose outside. Okay, first of all, by the way, he probably shouldn't have lost that badly. That was pretty bad. He just got absolutely roasted. Okay, so there might be a big ratings mismatch here. But the way that I would see this, okay, let's run this first. Let's run maybe a corner route right here. Let's see what happens. So he lost here too. Bad throw, but he lost. Okay, so the way that I would imagine man coverage being is that, again, if these guys are equal, there will be a first mover's advantage. And I would expect that the receiver wins each time, whether it's inside or outside. Okay, but it shouldn't be so bad, right? It should be enough that who's ever guarding him can simply just wrap up, make a tackle, live to play another down. Okay? So that's kind of what I would consider there. Then you have the option of shading either way. Okay, so this is where things start to get kind of interesting, where the element of game planning and strategy and things like that come into play. So you can shade. Okay, I think I actually touched the guy, so he didn't properly shade. So let's just go ahead and restart that. So you have the ability to shade, and I think this year's game, the shading is a lot stronger. So in years past, you could shade inside, outside, didn't really matter. But I think in this year's game, and again, I probably should have gotten ready and actually got these guys, matched up correctly in terms of the slot. I think this might be a safety here that I'm using. Anyway, shade inside, you see he does much better right there. And, okay, the receiver still catches the ball. Again, we probably have a ratings mismatch there, but I would expect if you are shading inside and the receiver cuts inside, that you're going to have an advantage and you're going to play that ball. You're going to, it's either going to be the quarterback sees that and just forgets about it, or, you're knocking that ball down, you're making a play on that, you're intercepting the ball, things like that. But at the same time, you're giving away much more on the outside. Okay, and so before I mentioned that, okay, if you're locked up, you're eye to eye, if you get beat outside, okay, that's fine, but you need to make the tackle. So here, that's going to be off leverage. So I would expect that he gets roasted, and it could be the difference between a touchdown, right? So you have this big give and take right here. Likewise, if I were to shade outside, and I do that same corner route, I shouldn't be able to, okay, let's just chalk that up again to either the mismatch or he didn't shade properly. I don't know what that was. Okay, a little bit better in this case. So he played that a little bit better. But likewise, if I shade outside and I cut inside, it should be a big win. Okay. Pretty good. Okay. Again, you know, it doesn't kind of play out exactly how you want it, but conceptually speaking, that's the kind of thing. If you're eye on eye, you're head up on the guy, you'll probably get beat to either side, but you should at least be able to, you know, make a decent attempt on the ball. If at the very least, you should be able to tackle the guy. If you shade a certain way, you should cut that way off completely, but the other way, if you shade inside and then he goes outside, you'll probably get beat, and vice versa. Okay? Now, here comes the consideration, right? You don't ever want to do that, right? If you don't have help, it just doesn't make sense. Like, it's just not worth it, right? It's either you're kind of trading off either covering one way and getting beat for a touchdown the other way. So it just doesn't make sense. So what you want then is you want some help. So usually, you know, in this case, I'm showing cover one. Usually in cover one, I don't have the ability to kind of, okay, I guess I have the ability to audible right here. Usually you have the ability to have help. Okay, so in cover one, the whole idea is these slot corners, they'll have outside shade so that they're defending corner routes, out routes, things like that, knowing that inside, over the top, they have the deep third, and then underneath they have the hole defender, the rat, the lurker, whatever you want to call them, the 3-receiver hook. So now, all of a sudden, you can start to think about, okay, I can shade, you know, I can cut off a certain element. Now I'm back to having the advantage as a defense, right? That first mover's advantage is no longer for the slot receiver, because if he first moves to the outside, I'm there. And if he first moves to the inside, my help is there. Likewise, you can think about it on the outside. Okay, there's no zones, but you can, where is it? You can shade inside knowing that your help is not human. Your help is the boundary. Okay, this boundary sideline. So in this case, okay, it's kind of, you have a little bit of space over there. The receiver can run like a quick out or a comeback route, but then, you know, it's a pretty far throw for kind of a marginal gain. So you could start to think about, you basically have double coverage on the inside with, you know, your outside here, and then your zones in the inside. Likewise with on the other side with the slot receiver here, he's outside of the tight end and he still has help inside. You can already see how this can get a little bit complicated in terms of overloading certain zones and certain shades. Outside over here, you have inside shade, knowing that you have the help of the sideline. And then here, okay, the linebacker doesn't really have help. Either, you know, there's a big mismatch there and the running back isn't great in space and he can kind of take him himself. Or you get this kind of like funnel action from the two linebackers where, you know, if the back goes out this way, or let's say the back goes out here, this guy becomes the hook. And now you kind of get this nice dynamic behavior where you get, you know, leverage where you need it. But, you know, that comes at the cost, basically. Okay, and this is where the time component comes in. This comes at the cost that where we have 7 men in coverage against 5 receivers. So we have a +2 there that allows us to get basically double coverage on certain receivers. And the smarter our coverage is, the smarter we can allocate our players, right? Certain routes might not need double coverage. Certain players might not need double coverage. So the smarter you are in terms of playing that, the better you can allocate your resources. But nevertheless, in this case, you only have 4 people rushing the quarterback against 5 blockers, right? So you're giving up this time component to be a little bit more solid in space, in terms of restricting the space. So you're giving up time, and you're also kind of, the other thing to consider is you're also giving up space for the quarterback, right? So if you're only rushing 4 of the 6 possible lanes right here, your quarterback has some room to escape as well. Okay, so that's something to also consider. You're already starting to think about many different levels of time, space, all the way throughout this interdimensional reality of this football space. Okay, and we'll get into that, you know, other videos and things like that. But you need to allocate in the best possible way. Okay, the other component here in terms of football, in terms of Madden football video games, and let's just time out right here and let's switch. So we talked about man coverage. Where really the only way that you can play man coverage and you don't have superior players across the board is you double cover everybody. Okay, everybody has somebody covering him outside. Everybody has somebody covering him inside, and you're good to go. But then that would result in basically 10 men in coverage and one guy blitzing the quarterback, and the quarterback can basically walk and get free yards, free first downs, free touchdowns. So let's talk about zone now. Let's talk about maybe cover 3. Okay, and let's go back to the little play I had here. If you've been watching my videos over these past years, these kind of 4 verticals, vert comebacks is always my what I show to kind of demonstrate some fundamental ideas, just because it's simple and it kind of stresses all the different layers of all the different spaces of the field, and it kind of helps me get my point across on certain things. So now you have really the same trade-off, this time and space trade-off, but just put into different ways with zone coverage. Okay, I think this way it's maybe a little bit more straightforward. Like, you have a lot of space right here and only so many resources to cover that space, right? So right away there are areas of the field that we know that are soft right here. Okay, so cover 3, let's just put these guys up into their zones just so we can better show this. We know that this area is soft. The seams will hit that area. And we know that this area right here is also soft between the deep zone and the curl flat. Things like, when you hit them with sail and flood and deep crossers and things like that. This area, like 15, 20 yards on the sideline, you can hit with those, like I just said, corners, crossers, comeback routes, like I have right here, and then the big seam area right here. Not to mention all the little underneath checkdowns and things like that, but this is the case. And even if you're running, let's say, Tampa 2, like Tampa 2 is kind of the same thing. It's just you're kind of changing up the leverage points and where those zones are coming from. But fundamentally, if you're playing zone, like just spot drop zone in this game, you're 4 under, 3 deep, simply put. Okay, maybe you could be 5 under, 2 deep, but that's just crazy. Like, you'll give up touchdowns. 4 deep and 3 under, like say like a cover 4 drop, is going to be difficult just because you'll just get eaten alive underneath. The best mix of things is some form of 4 under, 3 deep. And it's really just changing up between Tampa 2 and cover 3 just to kind of mess with the alignments and leverages and where the zones are coming from. But fundamentally, I mean, really, it's just kind of the same thing. But again, you have this distinct trade-off because, okay, I have 7 men in coverage, and that's pretty good, even though you can pick it apart quite easily. But again, you only have 4 guys rushing the quarterback, and so there's going to be a larger time component there. And, if you blitz a player and you bring in 5 rushers, and then you got, even fewer guys in zone. So you're doing that trade-off again. But where you start to think about things is, and I won't talk about this too much in this video. We'll talk about it in other videos. But in certain cases, in certain scenarios, you can give up time, or you can align your leverage of your players so that you're most efficiently using the resources available. Okay, so I'll give an example. When I'm coming up against an opponent and it's 4th and super long or 3rd and long, I'm almost always running like Tampa 2, protect the sticks. Okay, so then you end up having like all these guys deep. We don't really care about what's happening underneath. Right? We can even allow our opponent to have some time in the pocket because we don't care. Eventually, they have to throw the ball. And if they try to run the ball or scramble, we can rally with our guys. And so we're flooding the only area that they can attack, which is kind of this area right here. And it's almost impossible to play between those guys. Okay? So in that case, maybe it makes more sense. Maybe you don't want to run man coverage where, you could have, improper or suboptimal usage of your resources of guys covering or double covering underneath routes, and then you're getting one-on-one deep type of thing. Here, just simply where am I most likely to get threatened? And there's other, bits, if you can somehow pick up on tendencies and things like that, you can allocate your resources to the best possible place. But again, you have this trade-off between time and space. Likewise, if I want to add another guy into a zone, if I want to add this guy, over here, and I want to, have 5 under 3 deep, things get a little bit more difficult, but then, you're giving up much more time. And in this case, in Madden, if you have 3 pass rushers, the quarterback's going to have completely all day just because of the hard coding of the game. And it's just not worth that trade-off, in my opinion, in most cases. Okay, but one important thing I want to talk about zone coverage, spot drop zone coverage, other than the fact that, it's just fundamentally, like from a down-to-down basis, not a good coverage. You have these huge holes. Any decent quarterback will be able to, attack these big spaces in the seams, deep down the sideline. Basically, this intermediate area between the underneath zones and the deep zones, right? Because you can think about it like there's kind of 4 levels in the regular down to down. You have, the ultra deep, and depending on how your offense is structured, you can make sure that you are unlocking all of these different areas. But you can push these guys back, basically. You can kind of push these guys to here, kind of where their default drops are. And all of a sudden you can start to see that there's a big, 15-yard space between the first level and the top level, and likewise underneath. And the more you hit underneath, the more these guys creep down, and the more space that you have between the underneath guys and the guys up top. Okay, so you kind of have this wiggle room that you can play with. Likewise, if these guys start to drop, especially with things like zone drops in this game, you have even more room underneath. So you can really play with these guys. Now, that's kind of made obvious in terms of football over the years, where quarterbacks have gotten really, really good, right? They're dedicated, great diets, studying film all the game, not going out smoking, getting drunk after every game. These guys are serious. They know what they're doing. And then on the sideline, their coaches also know what they're doing, right? They're no longer, and I don't know if I can do it right here, but they're no longer, stacking the box, where we have like tight ends blocking and you have like one receiver on the field. And in that case, you can kind of get away with zone, right? Because you're not stretching these guys horizontally and vertically, right? If this corner isn't stretched horizontally and vertically, he can play over here. Or, sorry, maybe more like something like this. If he's not stretched horizontally and vertically, he can kind of sit right here. Likewise with this guy. If he's not stretched horizontally and vertically, he can sit here. If we're not stretched horizontally, these guys can tighten up in. If this guy isn't getting stretched vertically, he can come down type of thing. So if, back in the days when it wasn't spread offense, when things were compressed, things were tight, you didn't have the speed, you didn't have the quarterbacks, you didn't have all of the different motions and everything like that, it was difficult to pass the ball because your cover 3 now looks like this, as opposed to what I was showing you before. And so this is kind of more similar to what I showed you with like that Tampa 2 sticks coverage, except now it's even further down. So it's difficult to pass the ball. It's difficult to run the ball because these guys are so aggressive underneath. You can't pass underneath them. You might have like one guy stretching vertical, but like, okay, that's fine. Like you throw it up there one-on-one and hope for the best. Maybe that's fine. And so it just like spot drop zone just doesn't really make sense anymore. And then you can do things like, guessing different zones. Like you put an extra zone up here to try to like, make up for the weak points of a certain coverage, like in this case, cover 3, but then you're only much more weak in other places. right? Like these like Mabel coverages where you have, levels of players outside so that you don't get hit with sail. And then you as a user, you have to kind of roam all this area out here. And that might have been fine in like Madden whatever, like 16 or 17, I forget what it was, where you could kind of user like a hyena and pick off balls like just standing right here. That might have been fine, but in this game, you can't really move around like that anymore, so you need to play much more solid, much more fundamental. And then last thing I'll say about zone coverage, what's really important in terms of football video games, that makes things even worse for you. Okay, and we see like every year, it's like, oh my God, these games are so short, we're scoring more points than regular football games. It's the fact that these defenders don't have eyes, right? They don't have eyes. The quarterback isn't looking anywhere. Maybe back in like Madden 06 or whatever it was with the quarterback vision, but they don't have eyes, right? So if let's say we have 4 verticals right like this, the safety has to stay deep right in the middle. He has to play both because both of those are a potential target. But if the quarterback is looking left, okay, he can start to cheat over there. And then if he looks right, likewise, okay, maybe the quarterback's really good. He can look off, defenders and things like that. But in many cases, you have to look where you're going to pass first. So the DB can kind of get a head start and kind of you can rotate your zone. Okay, and then you have things like hot blitzes, eyes coverage, where you have like 5 zones instead of 7 that are able to work in real life because of this idea of rotating and dynamically adjusting where your defense is depending on the state of the game, the state of the play. And one of the key data points that you could pick up on is just where's the quarterback looking, right? If he's looking left, well, we can start to shift a little bit left. And especially with the time component, if we're adding in a blitz and the quarterback won't have time to look the other way, we can be more confident and more aggressive to constrain the space. We can kind of move as a unit, right? But just the nature of football video games, again, like these guys have to be on rails, basically. You can't do these things dynamically. Maybe like with things like switch stick and stuff like that now, you can kind of do that as a user, but that's just like 1 or 2 players, right? And so in the end, you get kind of a rails coverage, and if you know how to spread the defense, you can pick them apart pretty easily. Okay, that's zone coverage. I've already been talking for a while. I want to talk about one more thing, and that's match coverage. So match coverage, your things like cover 3 match, quarters, palms, things like that. So let's go quarters. Let's go back to the exact same play because we don't really care about the actual play at the moment. But so what is match coverage? So match coverage, depending on, you have sometimes like zone-based match coverages and sometimes you have man-based man coverages. But generally speaking, it is what I showed you with cover 1 and man coverage in general, where you want to maintain leverage on your opponent. But you want to do it in a smart way, right? In cover 1 hole, it's not super smart, right? Your help is always going to be inside low, inside high, right? And if your opponent knows that, they can hit you with multiple crossers, mesh, things like that to overload your opponent or to overload you and make it difficult for you to always have the key leverage points. Okay, so let's talk about quarters right here. Okay, so quarters, I'm just going to like move these guys aside. I'm just talking about the left side. Okay, like these coverages tend to be done on split fields. So what happened is on the right side here, we don't even really care about it. I'm just talking about the left side right here. So what we have is basically a triangle coverage. And actually the way I want to do this, sorry, let's go to palms. Okay, let's go to palms. Just because I think it makes a little bit more sense for 2 receivers. Let's, again, move these guys out just so we have a little bit of space. So basically with palms is you have 3/2 over here. Okay, you have basically the corner is playing kind of like a cover 2 technique. He's playing like outside, right? If the number 1 goes outside or vertical, he's got him. If number 2 goes outside, he's got him. And it's kind of the same thing on this side with the quarter flat right here. He's basically got who's ever coming inside. Okay, and then you have the safety over the top, kind of splitting these guys. He's kind of the adjuster right here, right? So if number 2, which is the slot receiver, goes inside, right, this quarter flat, and I'll show you right here. Maybe I'll just do a little example right here. Let's just go like this. And again, don't pay attention too much to what actually happens in the game. We don't really care about that. So in this case, like, okay, the leverage is kind of weird. Like he should have inside leverage, but he kind of forces himself outside right here, and he lets the receiver kind of beat him. But he really should be in front of him covering that up. So he has that. He should have inside leverage on this guy, okay? And the safety sees that. He doesn't need to help him. So the corner has outside leverage on number 1, so he can help out and bracket that receiver over there. So you see what I mean? It's like dynamic. It's dynamic in a sense that you'll always maintain superior leverage no matter what happens, right? If this combination of receivers do two streaks, or a comeback with a streak, or a switch combination, or a slant flat, whatever it is, you want to make sure that you have the optimal leverage of how that plays out. The problem with match coverage, though, is that for the many years that it's been in the game, it's still it's better. It's definitely improved over the years, but it's still not super right in terms of the rules, in terms of the leverages, in terms of that stuff. So you're kind of left to, man coverage. You have the downside of it's static, and it's hard to basically guess the leverage points that you need. Okay, zone coverage, it's just too much space to cover with so limited guys. They don't have eyes, that type of thing. Match coverage is really, to me, like how you actually play coverage, how you play defense in football, but it's just not quite right yet. It gets a little bit better every year, but there's still a lot of glaring issues. So at the end here, I think these videos, you look towards something that's something to pick up on and something to learn and something to like, oh yeah, okay, I can use this and get better. But really, it's there's no happy ending right here. It's simply just you have 3 types of coverages, and they all have major downsides. The last one, match coverage, in theory has a much lower downside, but in execution and practice in this game, there's enough issues with it that it makes it really difficult to use. Not to mention, you kind of need to know what you're doing, to be honest with you. And, sometimes it's, you're playing a game and you don't want to, be studying a book. You want to play the game, have some fun. So that's the other aspect of it. And ultimately you have a trade-off, right? Even there's some cases in match coverage, even in the best case, you're not able to perfectly align to every possible leverage point, and you could use more guys in coverage, but then it's this time component as well. So that's kind of what I want to talk about at high level. We'll go into more details as we go on to other videos. How we can use different matchups, different scenarios, different data points, different tendencies to kind of adapt our resources in the best way for any given situation. But just kind of at a high level, these are, I think, important considerations that we'll need to know going forward. Okay, so stick with me from there, and we'll see you guys there.